Yeehaw. Alright, I hope I have enough of a signal where I am, which, as you can see, is a random construction site. Not really random. I already forgot what I was supposed to talk about. Oh yeah, the theme of practical versus principled reasons to be an anarchist. This is something that gets touched on briefly in Candles in the Dark. Oh, I should mention that while I'm thinking of it. The New Hampshire and Washington State and Colorado Candles in the Dark events are now available, and tickets are for sale. If you go to larkenrose.com and go to the store, you'll see how to get them. So New Hampshire is in July next month. Pennsylvania probably will be too, but the tickets aren't available for that yet. Washington State, just north of Seattle, is August, and then September is Denver, Colorado. But you can go get tickets to those because those three are finally up on the website. Okay, so this is something that actually it comes up briefly in the seminars. The thing of practical versus principled. And at first this may seem like, oh, this is sort of theoretical, philosophical stuff. Why do I give a crap? There's actually a reason to give a crap, which is that if somebody reaches the position of anarchism based on just thinking it will work better, in other words, it's just a practical solution, it's just, well, in the real world, I think this will benefit me better than having a ruling class, and there are arguments to be made for that. But if somebody reaches it from that angle instead of from the moral principled angle, or the understanding that political philosophy or political authority can't be legitimate ever, if they just got to it from a practical standpoint, then the moment they change their mind about what's practical, they're not anarchists anymore. And I think this explains why, most of the time, I've talked about a bunch how people, when they come out of statism, they don't go back. Now, there are a few examples of people who got all scared about immigration or about whatever else and decided to, some of them just went full fascist. And I'm not sure this explains all of them, but I think a lot of that is just if somebody, for their own benefit, like they don't believe in right and wrong, they don't actually have principles, they just kind of thought it would have worked better to not have a ruling class, but then suddenly they think it would serve them better to have a ruling class. If there was never principles behind it, then they can just jump back to being a statist, or jump all the way to being a fascist, or a communist, or a whatever else, if they imagine that political authority can be legitimate and moral and righteous, and to them it was just a question of what works. There's also the problem of when you're arguing about what works, you're basically doing guessing and predicting, and when you're talking to most of the world, their ability to guess and predict is horrendously bad. Like, they don't understand enough about human behavior and economics to have a rational discussion there. And so much of statism is based on fear-mongering and telling people we'd all be killing and eating each other if we didn't have politicians controlling us, and we'd all just be letting people starve to death if we didn't have government welfare, and we'd all be violent criminals if we didn't have government protecting us, and all these things. And so if it comes down to guessing and predicting, people are so bad at understanding just cause and effect that you basically have to start from square one and explain to them human behavior. And there's some great books about that, about economics and all that. But like, to have to build that whole framework just to get to the point of saying, and politicians don't have the right to rule us, is sort of a drastically inefficient way to get there. Now, I know a bunch of anarchists who got there by way of the practical reasoning, and there is plenty of argument to be made for the practical reasoning of, why, for the vast majority of people, it's going to work better to not have a ruling class. Now, for the parasites, it probably works better to have a ruling class. That way they don't have to be productive, and they can be protected, they can commit a bunch of crimes and be protected by a bunch of thugs paid for with money they stole from other people. So some people actually benefit from having a statist authoritarian society. It's just mostly the evil people. And if there isn't, like the sales pitch you have to use if you're just going for the practical thing immediately fails on anybody who thinks they're already being served by government. Like if somebody gets a social security check, trying to explain to them, well, in the long run, you'd be better off if that thing that sends you checks disappears. Like, good luck talking them into that. As long as they're a beneficiary of the extortion, if they don't see any, principled problem with it, why should the recipients of stolen loot, if they think it's perfectly okay, what do you think the chances are that you're going to talk them into deciding to not get that stolen loot every month if they feel perfectly fine about it? Like, trying to convince them that on a practical basis, you'd be better off if you weren't getting a check every month, which in the long run is actually true, because society would be so prosperous and people would have so much to spare and to help voluntarily. But in the short run, it's not true. Like, people who are sitting around and getting a check, whether because they're on Social Security because they're older or because they're on welfare for whatever reason, trying to give them a practical argument about how your life would be better if you weren't getting free stuff, talk about an uphill battle. But if you point out to them, hey, that's stolen loot, and they're still going to probably be resistant to hearing it and understanding it, but if they do understand it and realize, oh, wow, this isn't okay. Before it was, yay, fun, free stuff, but when you realize, yeah, other people are actually being robbed and caged to give you that free stuff, then that can persuade people even against their own sort of short-term physical personal interests. And that's the thing, is if you're arguing the practical side, all you can argue is that it'll be in the individual's personal interest it'll be in their best interest to drastically change the world. And the thing is, because people are so uncomfortable with anything they're unfamiliar with, you're basically saying, take this comfortable, predictable life that you have. Maybe you have problems and stuff, but you're not, like, dying and nobody's shooting at you. Take that comfortable, predictable world and trade it in for a complete unknown that you've never seen, that sounds foreign and strange and weird to you. Don't worry, it'll work out just fine. Like, if your argument is from the practical side, why would anybody believe you? I mean, you're right, and if they understood enough about economics and reality and stuff, they would agree, but most people don't, and you're trying to sell them a giant unknown and get them to let go of what is familiar to them. So if you're not approaching it from a principled standpoint, first of all, persuading somebody else is a pain in the neck, if not impossible. Second of all, the people who get there just from the practical argument can just as easily go in a different direction from a practical argument. Decide, well, now I think that fascism is better. And if there was no moral principle underlying their position to begin with, like, what's to stop them from doing that if they think they might benefit? Because, under fascist dictatorships, some people did better than they were doing under whatever form came before. Lots of people did worse and got murdered and stuff. But that's a principle thing, to say, this system, even if right now you're benefiting and doing fine under this system, it's doing evil crap. It shouldn't exist because of that evil crap. And the fact that you're doing just fine is not the only thing that matters when determining whether it's okay. And so also the whole approach of candles in the dark has to do with using what people already know and using the moral codes they already have, as opposed to, like, trying to give them, years worth of economic education in 10 minutes. Like, good luck with that. When it comes to the principle thing, you can just tap into what they already have if you know how to ask the questions and how to approach it. You don't have to get into the bog of guessing and predicting. And I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the laundry list of weird, bizarre, fear-mongering predictions statists make, if not for government. It isn't just, but what about the roses? Invaders and this, and everybody will be sick and nobody will know how to read and there'll be warlords and, anything they can imagine in their head, If they don't understand economics and human behavior, they can think, well, that might happen. I don't want that to happen, so I want to stick with what we still have. I've talked before about the fact that people, to just a drastic degree, will usually stick with what is familiar to them, even if it's just horrible. Even if it's literally a war zone, most people will stay in the war zone and go, well, this is where I live. Unless their house all the way gets blown up, and then they go, oh, well, I guess I don't live here anymore. Maybe I should go somewhere else. But whether somebody's in like a violent relationship or a dangerous neighborhood or an actual war zone, people tend to be more comfortable with what's familiar, even if it's familiar and massively dangerous. And so with that in mind, if you're trying to talk them into something they've never seen and can't really imagine, and you're trying to talk them into it on a practical basis, like, never mind what you already know and you're already comfortable with and you already have a predictable life that you know how it works, I want you to advocate something that's completely foreign to you, that you don't even know how anything would work, because trust me, it'll work out better for you. And that's just a really inefficient approach, and it doesn't really work, because as long as they're scared of something, as long as they can imagine some boogeyman out there that's going to hurt them without the state, then you have no argument. If you're just arguing from the practical and saying, this will work better, and they say, oh, scary Muslims, okay, what other argument do you have? None. Except, like, trying to talk them out of thinking they're scary Muslims or scary Russians or Chinese or whoever they're scared of this week. Like, good luck with that. And that's why, even though I do know a bunch of anarchists who got there from the logical or the practical reasoning, I don't at all suggest people argue from that position, because it's totally weak. It's totally a position that people can go back on if they decide, well, maybe this won't work. I'm not really sure. And they go out in the world and they say, oh, there's a bunch of people that are really stupid and short-sighted, like they see a riot or something, or they see people being idiots on, some shopping day where they're trampling each other, and they go, people are just too dumb, we need a ruling class. And if they don't get why a ruling class is inherently illegitimate, they're always going to jump back to that security blanket if it's just a practical argument. I'm not sure how this is going to work, so we need this big magical mystical thing to make things work out, because I don't know how they would otherwise. So you're up against that if your position is based on the practical side of things, instead of being based on the principle. Because I got there by accident, by figuring out that political authority can't be legitimate no matter what. By the time I was an anarchist, I still wasn't convinced that on a practical basis it would work better. I am now, because I understand economics better. But I was still of the position that I don't know what's going to happen, but it's impossible for this to be legitimate. It's impossible for a parasitic, coercive ruling class to be morally legitimate. So whatever the outcome is, that's not okay. It's sort of the cliche example, but who's going to pick the cotton? Even if the cotton industry would completely fall apart, slavery is bad and should be ended. Like, that's the moral versus the practical. If you're talking to somebody, back then in slavery days, when slavery was called slavery anyway, and your argument is just, don't worry, your cotton plantation will do even better without slaves. Like, talk about an uphill argument to try to make. But if you say, whether or not you do better, this is totally evil and has to be ended, people can at least understand that, and they don't have to have like a degree in economics. Actually, most people with a degree in economics don't understand basic economics either. But all they have to do is understand, yeah, it's not okay to own people. And then the whole discussion of, but who will pick the cotton, is like, I don't know, I don't care, that doesn't change right and wrong. So that's not a rebuttal. I'm not going to cheer for slavery because I'm not sure how cotton's going to be harvested without it. That's not good enough. And it's the same thing when you can show somebody that the belief in political authority and government is not just contrary to your beliefs, it's contrary to theirs. And that's one of the key things about Candles in the Dark, is it just uses their own view of how people should be and morality and however they define right and wrong to show that they will always have contradictions inside their own head between their own morality and their belief in politics. Your values and your moral code don't even need to enter into it. But if you're arguing the practical, then you're starting from scratch and you have to talk them into understanding all sorts of things and then jumping into a giant unknown instead of clinging to something that's fairly predictable and relatively easy for most people. Because being a caged animal is relatively easy. Like, well, I know where I live, and yeah, they take a bunch of my money, and I'm not too happy about that, but it's predictable, and I have my house, and I have my car, and I have my big screen TV, and I can do all sorts of things after I ask politicians for permission to do them, and the other half I can't do. Oh well, like, that's the price we pay for being the livestock of politicians. So it's comfortable enough that if there isn't a principled reason for them to give it up, most people are just going to cling to it because it's familiar. And if they think it's okay, if it's okay and familiar, why would they give it up? All right, I'm just going to jam on the brakes and back up and see if I can respond to some comments. Whoops, they're jumping around all over here. I'm wrong on border zones. That's not what this is about, but wait, in your papers, please. Why are you making fun of yourself? But I will do a separate Facebook Live thing about that. I'm about to get mauled by a stink bug. Let's see if I can scroll up. The comments are jumping around all over the place. So a bunch of people are on here trying to argue about the border thing. The victims have more of a claim to the state's monopolized land. No, they don't, but that's not the discussion going on here. In case you weren't paying attention and we're just in trolling mode. There's the thing that Brett says brings up the thing, trying to get, especially if you're arguing the practical, trying to get the older generation to give it up when they think they've paid into it all these years, and now they're like, well, now I don't want to work. I'm retired. I want my Social Security check and my retirement check, and don't rock the boat and don't change anything, because now is when I'm sitting around on my ass and having my children's money be stolen to be given to me. Although most of them don't know that's what it is. They actually think they paid into something, and they didn't. They're just getting money stolen from their children. And if you can show that to them, again, based on the principled thing, some of them will go, oh, wait, I'm not really that happy about that. Whereas if it's just the practical, like I said before, how are you going to convince them that on a practical basis, you'll be better off not having that free check every month as opposed to having it? Like, good luck with that argument. Wait, whoops. Yeah, and it isn't just, like Robert's saying, it isn't just direct checks. It's all sorts of benefits people think they get from the state, which is funny because, like, they think, well, the government gives us the roads. No, the government steals your money, wastes most of it, and then, does some corrupt bid to some politician's brother-in-law to do the work. Like, it's still us doing the work. It's not the politicians and the cops doing the work. It's us building the freaking roads and paying for it with a really inefficient, corrupt middleman in between. But if people perceive government as building the roads or doing any of those services, they will assume that no government equals none of those services, even though all the people and the resources are still there. It's only removing the politicians and the idea that they have the right to rule. That's all that goes out of the equation. Doesn't remove any of the know-how or the effort or the productivity of the actual people who already produce all of it. I want to talk about the emotional aspect of trying to reach status. Lots of anarchists go full fascist because of fear, too. Yeah, and fear is totally the mind killer, and we have all sorts of examples of that, of people going... So there's a difference between emotion and principle. They do sort of interrelate. Like, I don't mind guilt-tripping people who are advocating evil and saying, look what you're actually advocating about actual people in the real world. And look what's actually happening as a result of what you advocate. and in the hope that decent people will feel bad about it, because they totally should if they're condoning something that's hurting innocent people. And so it's, yeah, well, I already talked about that. I don't have to do it over again. Debate someone with a different view than you. That's very specific. I do wonder, does anybody know if there's a way to do Facebook Live with two people at once? As far as I know, it's just this. You can't add another person. Because it would be fun to do debates, but I don't think there's a way to on Facebook Live. Like, I could do it separately as a thing and edit it and post it as a video. That's a pain in the neck compared to Facebook Live. I just go click and then I'm on. But if there was another way to bring somebody in, yeah, it'd be fun to do debates between rational people. It's funny because the ones who are most rabidly saying, you have to debate this person, it's always some emotional fascist moron that they want me to debate, because the people who are just like rational and calm aren't that frothing at the mouth to get attention for themselves. But it'd be fun to, and I've done a bazillion debates before, but it would be fun to debate people here and there, and I'll often see somebody and saying something I disagree with and thinking, hey, you're coherent and rational. It would be really cool to have this as a public discussion, but I don't know that that's possible on Facebook Live, which makes it more complicated to do. Wow, these comments are jumping around all over the place. I don't know where I am. Please come to Chicago. I have had a few people ask about me doing a Candles in the Dark in Chicago. It's just a matter of timing and demand, and I'm still and trying to figure out where it would be worth it. I kind of need to demonstrate that it's worth it in the places that are already scheduled first, before I schedule any more, which again is New Hampshire, Colorado, and Washington State are all scheduled if you go to larkenrose.com and go to the store. Actually, a thing that Robert mentioned, his comment is, Larken Rose, man on the street, flipping status. That would be a great video. I actually want to do something like that in conjunction with Candles in the Dark. Little clips like that of, you're never going to have a profound substantive discussion, well, not very often, with someone you randomly meet on the street, but I'm thinking of actually randomly bribing people in the street. Like, you get $10 for 5 minutes of answering questions about what you believe. Just like at Candles in the Dark, we the last session, we pay statists $50 to come in for 15 minutes and have a back and forth discussion so people can practice what they learned over the weekend. And that's been some of the most fun, eye-opening parts of the events. So it would be a little version of that, a man on the street version with just me doing it. So let me see. Is it necessary for communism and socialism to arrive before we reach anarchism? No, it's necessary to completely avoid collectivism because it's an insanely bad idea. If people want to try it voluntarily, be my guest, but economically it's still going to fail, and if they want to force it on everybody else. Oh, so Tyrell already said, what? Communism, socialism are antithetical to anarchy. He beat me to it. Let's see. You'll never get the masses to turn. There's the spirit. I'm going to slightly pick on Justin, even though I know nothing about him, so this isn't really about you personally, Justin. Most of the people I hear who say that sort of thing are exactly the people who should come to a Candles in the Dark event because they think they've tried everything. And what they really tried was everything rational and logical and objective that they could think of, and when that doesn't work, they decide nothing works. Because they skip the whole aspect of psychology, which matters way more than what you're actually saying. As far as whether you're going to get through to somebody and have them hear what you're saying and understand it, and whether you're going to have any chance of persuading them. Actually, yes, the masses are all going to be voluntarists, and they're not even going to use the word, because by the time they get there, it'll just be what everybody believes. It won't even be a thing. It won't be a movement anymore. It'll be a stupid superstition that everybody has given up. But when people think people are just way too dumb to understand it, most people are never going to catch on, they're wrong. and they're basing that on them talking the way they think people should listen and understand ideas. Like, I'm explaining it intellectually, 2 + 2 = 4, and this person didn't understand and they ran away, therefore they're incapable of understanding it. That's not at all true. Because you have to keep in mind all the weird things human psychology does that gets in the way of that, and then you have to figure out how to get around them, which is what Candles in the Dark is about. It's also what the Mirror is about, the computer program thing, which is more or less, that they both use very similar approaches and techniques, except Candles in the Dark is teaching people to do it one-on-one with people they know and stuff, and the Mirror is going to be an automatic interactive program that just runs by itself and walks people through it. But it's, yeah, whenever people think, oh, this is just hopeless, and I've been doing this for 20 years, so if it's hopeless, and anybody should be saying it's hopeless, it's me. And for a long time, I thought it was hopeless, and I kept doing it anyway, because I thought, well, I think this is really important, I think it's obviously true, I have to keep saying it, but holy smokes, is it frustrating how dense people are. And I'm not saying people aren't dense, I'm saying there are ways to get around their density to actually get way more people to understand it. Doesn't mean it works on everybody, doesn't mean everyone's going to understand it, that you'll get through to every single person you talk to. But when you understand the psychological side of things and change just little things about the way you think and the way you talk, you may suddenly notice very different results that you get when talking to people. So that's that's one of the biggest thing about Candles in the Dark. One of the things it covers. It's sort of its main purpose. So Brett's saying, his dad gets the principles, but it's like, what can you do? And I can sort of sympathize with that. And what I'd say to people like that is, well, okay, if you think the rest of the world is just going to keep bumbling along being staged, if you understand it and agree with it, but you just sort of think we're doomed because the rest of the world is bumbling along, I could try to talk you into thinking there's more hope than that. But the two things I would ask is, one, if you understand the principles, don't you be one of the ones advocating immoral authoritarian aggression. Like, even if you think everybody else is going to, don't do it yourself. And while you're at it, maybe mention these things to people you know and see if you can get them to not do it. And you don't have to expect the world to change, and you can still think we're doomed, but don't be part of the problem. I mean, and it's sort of, and I've thrown this in many a minarchist's face who says, well, there's going to be politics, so we might as well use it, blah, blah, blah. After giving up the moral argument, well, yeah, it's illegitimate that the state functions by aggression, but it's going to be it, so we should use it. It's basically like saying, well, there's always going to be murder, so I'm going to go commit murder. There's always going to be theft and extortion, so I'm going to go do it, because it might as well benefit me. It's going to happen anyway. There's a difference between people out there are going to do bad stuff, and I'm going to do bad stuff because somebody was going to, which is a totally bogus, immoral argument. So even if people think they're just, the world is doomed, people are just going to be violent statists, I'll just say, okay, just don't be one of them. Can I request that much, that you not be part of this giant, illegitimate, violent monster? Yes, this is an edition, and I did get the master's permission. Don't remind me. Let me see. Comments jumping around all over the place. Professor CJ? I don't know who you mean, so apparently not. You live video switcher and then go live from PC. Okay, I think I know what you mean. So in other words, it's not using Facebook to do it, it's just manually switching the video feed at my end. Except then they'd have to physically be here, I think. But whatever. So really? Called Blue Jean to have two people on at once? Does that work? This is a comment from Shepard. Does that work in Facebook? In Facebook Live? Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to find out. Oh, somebody's saying yes, you can. Backwards, the band does it often. Cool. We'll have to find out. So I guess I could just end there. At some point, I will do a Facebook Live about not just about the same border thing. I mean, I did the last one about how freaking dishonest they are. And the funny thing is, a bunch of closed border advocates came along and did exactly, precisely what I say they do, which is very nice of them. But there are a couple sort of feeble arguments that might be worth addressing just to demolish, but I don't know when I'm going to do that. I don't know who this comment was at, whether it was me or somebody else, but somebody asked about the virtue signaling thing. There's several things that I did a post about this a while ago. Several things that basically mostly fascists and the alt-right now use to basically insult anybody who's at all like decent or has moral principles. And it's funny because they came from ideas that are actually, worth criticizing, but then they expand it to everything. Like the whole virtue signaling. They'll now use that against anybody who has a principle. Like, oh, you're just virtue signaling by saying you don't advocate violent aggression against your neighbor. Well, if you want to call it that, fine. Like, what the term originally meant was people who aren't even doing anything, they're just going out of their way to say how good they are. Like, okay, so what? But now basically the alt-right fascists try to stick that label on anybody who has any principle or just decency. Social justice warrior is another one that it used to have a specific meaning, and now it's just sort of anybody who thinks you shouldn't be an asshole or shouldn't violently attack people, the fascists, well, you're a social justice warrior. And my favorite insult is purist. Like, oh, you're one of those people who actually has principles and sticks by them. You're such a purist. Like, that's an insult. And it's always from people who want to totally cave and compromise the principle of non-aggression and say, well, now I'm so scared that we should have violent aggression against those people over there because they're scary. So it's sort of funny and lame, the things that people just decide are insults that don't even mean anything. I mean, they're just all the way complaining, oh, you're like being moral and not attacking people and stuff. Hey, snowflake. Which is funny because the alt-right fascists are some of the most thin-skinned babies around, which is why they join a gang. It's why they want an authoritarian gang. It's why most people join gangs, because they feel weak and insufficient by themselves and they want to feel powerful. And, I mean, that's the whole notion of fascism. The fascia, the bundle of sticks tied together, is individually we're a bunch of weak, whiny babies, but if you bundle us together in an authoritarian bundle of stupidity, then we feel powerful and can boss other people around. A slight paraphrasing of the symbolism, but close enough. Okay, somebody else explaining how to do a video thing. Alrighty. So that might be it for now, and I will come back and comment in the text. It's probably something else I was going to mention, but I already forget what it is. So, alrighty then. See you later.